The Vampire Coast has disembarked onto Total War Warhammer 2's coastline, and man, what an entrance they've made for themselves. When the announcement trailer rippled across Creative Assembly's social media, I was left both surprised and skeptical. People wanted the faction, yet the lack of legendary lords and a proper army roster barred it from serious consideration. But after several in-depth streams, development diary videos, and campaign walkthroughs published both by the company's content creators and YouTube influencers, the message was clear. This is a force to beware. I took a longer break from Total War Warhammer 2 since 2018 summer, both from burnout and for the soon-to-be campaign pack reveal. Since November though, I played exclusively as them and am, once again, stunned by Creative Assembly's skill at developing a faction that combines mechanics and themes from several existent races and mold them into a unique spin. So here I am, with my tactical analysis video. Essays focused more on gameplay and its technical minutiae in titles where my min-maxing nature goes amok, literally. And strategy games are my favorites, so expect most of these to cover this genre. Now, load your pistols, sharpen your sabers. It's time to cut high elves and lizardmen to pieces. Hoy! The Vampire Coast is an undead, half-horde, half-settler faction. That's a lot to unpack from the start, and this setup renders their geoscape a precise, concentrated mishmash. Like vampire counts, Vampire Coast's corruption increases unit replenishment per turn, attrition casualties of invaders, and public order. Unlike the vampire counts, however, our pirates don't suffer attrition on uncorrupted territory, a major advantage for their barnacled bones. As such, vampiric corruption serves only defensive means. Buildings that reinforce or increase it are fewer in number when compared to the vampire counts, so your management of it is going to be more difficult, but at the same time, not necessary for aggressive expansionism. You can augment its numerical yield per turn through a provincial commandment, though that +2 increase is still incremental. The Vampire Coast has a lot simpler and more comfortable settlement infrastructure. No unit or building needs an adjacent addition to function. Say goodbye to dwarven or imperial armories for your mid to late game units, because each building is self-sufficient. Your aim for better units, greater vampiric corruption, or agents is much easier. Resources are identical to Tomb Kings. One slot at tier 2, and they provide bonuses different from everyone else. For the Vampire Coast, which is a bit odd I must say, each tradable resource provides a -10% reduction cost for building construction and another good for your trade agreements. These bonuses stack with each resource slot in a region. On an individual level, they're a nice facilitation, but there are a few examples where your provincial upgrades dish out a lot quicker. Luther Harkon's titular Vampire Coast has 3 resources in the Vortex map, and Silostra's southern jungles of Pahwalasha province in the Mortal Empires map has 2. Take the former example and look at how expensive a tier 5 The Awakening settlement upgrade costs, 7,200 gold. Take 30% out of it, provided by the resource slots, and all you need is growth sufficient enough to reach the maximal tier swiftly. So, where does the half-horde factor come in? In each legendary lord's humongous ships that possess settlement building trees. They've a growth meter as well, although it's much faster, because each building tier needs that growth to be built. For your tier 1 ship, you need 2 or 3 growth levels to construct barracks for your ranged infantry or monsters. The moment you fill that up, the next ones will be more expensive. However, this only applies to the base tiers. Allow me to illustrate. The building for ranged infantry has 4 tiers. It needs 2 growths to be constructed, upscaled by 2 each time a slot is filled before it. Then, for the next 2 tiers, it only needs 1 growth, but the final tier requires 2. Other structures are calculated in a similar fashion. This provides two huge benefits against your opponents. Firstly, you don't have to exercise territorial aggression. Each Vampire Coast legendary lord requires only their starting location or one more province to sustain themselves and have a base to retreat to. They're the first ever faction that doesn't have to undertake lengthy conquests to become stronger. Secondly, they are now the quickest to obtain mid to late game units who will dominate over your opponents. The Depth Guard, for example, can be acquired in less than 20 turns. Same for the Rotten Prometheans or Mongols. The ships have utility upgrades that also hasten replenishment, campaign movement range, or accumulate winds of magic reserves. After several difficult battles, you don't have to withdraw for recovery. Just stay put for several turns in an encampment stance and you'll have your army ready for war again. The economy and diplomacy have distinct differences based on the selected legendary lords, and that's when the game becomes more complicated. For the purpose of this analysis, I've chosen two early and late game campaigns and in two Vortex and Mortal Empires maps to show you what I mean. Aranessa Saltspite and Silostra Defan are perfect early game counters. The former starts in the Vortex map, the latter in Mortal Empires. Aranessa Sartosa is a regionless provincial capital of 10 slots, with a wealthy settlement tier, a port, and 3 economic landmarks, a powerful headquarters to supply her army. Your target are Ulthuan's eastern outer kingdoms. Still, you're on the more defensive side, because Ivris is already your enemy, and as an Ulthuan kingdom, it'll attract more High Elven factions against you. You have to attack them, or they'll continuously besiege Sartosa, and you'll get nowhere. All you have to do, though, is take out Ivris and Kothic if they start a war with them and capture some of their lands, and keep their 2 provinces for a healthy economy. You control, altogether, 5 ports and a gold mine, which are more than enough for Aranessa's unique army composition. If you take out Ivris quick enough, Norskans to the northeast will make your northern High Elven neighbors too busy to focus on you. At the same time, you might grow mighty enough to frighten them away from potential combat. The only problem is Lothern, Tyrion's faction to the west. They're a terrifying opponent to face early game, and might sink your entire campaign if you're too careless. I did exercise a devious policy I didn't expect to work. Each time Tyrion has gotten close to a war declaration, I gave him a small monetary gift to calm him down. It also worked against him, because if he'd attack me, he'd be considered treacherous due to all my gifts. This way, I kept my way free for Ivris's extermination, while Tyrion had to ignore me and concentrate on Ulthuan's rebellious inner kingdoms. For Aranessa Sartosa, High Elves are the primary target. After your early game establishment, it's either the Norskans to the northeast, Tyrion to the west, or, if you're feeling fancy, Tomb Kings and Savage Orcs to the south. Silostra's Mortal Empire's start is Monument to the Moon, a regional settlement west of Ulthuan and beneath the Isthmus of Lustria. She has to deal with Savage Orcs first, and has to recolonize the abandoned provincial capital, Pahuash. It's a problematic slow start. You can't develop your armies or your ship in order to eliminate the Blue Viper clan in time before they become a huge hassle, and Pahuash's colonization costs a lot of money and units. However, you do get 2 ports and 2 resource slots, and an entire province to boot. For at least 10 to 15 turns, you have to wait and build up Silostra's ship, the Lamprey, to get the units specific for her playstyle. Afterwards, you have an even more brazen goal than Aranessa's: Lothern. Silostra's whole thematic and gameplay point is to capture the High Elves' racial capital. To do so, you must cross the sea, wait for the garrison to be without an additional army, sack and capture it the same turn. Thus, you get a rich 10-slot capital and its humongous port, and a solid early game start for her. Simpler in structure, more difficult in execution. Her Pahualasha province can fend off for itself without her assistance, and Lothern is an excellent start to subjugate the entire Ulthuan under her banner. These 2 ladies exemplify the Vampire Coast's early game's point: quick extermination of neighboring factions and a solid foundation. either destroy their armies, sack their settlements, and force them into diplomatic submission to leave you alone or to your raids across the globe, or take their provinces and use that money to begin your nautical rampage. Luther Harkon takes the most provinces of the 4. In late game's Vortex map, you have about 3 to 4, depending on how strong your primary target, Shlanhuapek's lizardmen, are. His faction becomes powerful enough to wield 2 legions against anyone he dare so chooses. It could be lizardmen to the northwest with Mazdamundi at the head, Dark and High Elves to the north, Skaven, Dark Elves and Tomb Kings to the south, or more Tomb Kings and Bretonnians to the east. The Awakening, a 10-slot racial capital, and the entire province is one of the Vampire Coast's richest. 3 resource slots, 4 ports. So you'll never run out of money or possible trade agreements. Shlanhuapek's heartlands have a standard landlocked wealth, but its northwestern territory has 2 additional ports for your playthrough. Noctilus's campaign is my favorite though. This guy, for his entire campaign, needs only 1 spot. The Galleon's Graveyard, an oceanic, regionless, 10-slot capital beneath Lothern. Arduous to attack for everyone, Noctilus's base will be attacked on rare occasions at best. It's also a rich enough place to feed his expensive but indestructible army as well. Noctilus can choose anyone and everyone. His war policy targets almost every race on Warhammer's planet. Sack Lothern to the north, Bordello to the far east, Nagarond to the northwest. It doesn't matter. Noctilus can get there and wreak havoc. He also uses Pirate Coves the most extensively, a new geoscape mechanic I purposefully didn't talk about until now, because it highlights the late game's point. Pirate Coves are buildings that can be constructed by fleet captains, a special agent, or your armies after they win a siege battle. These generate infamy, a resource you need to complete the lore thematic quest on the Vortex map. But they also allow recruitment of more Mongol Haunters, an assassin agent, generate 200 income per turn and 2% more trade tariffs per turn, or 50% of the location's income per turn. Only Luther Harkon, and Silostra if you want the entire Ulthuan, can conquer more provinces for themselves. The rest need only Pirate Coves to survive. Look at my Noctilus campaign on Mortal Empires, where I've established a Pirate Cove for each major port, which are also often racial capitals. I generate so much income, it rises to 15,000 gold or so per turn if I remove both my Dreadfleet armies. Also, I gain intel on each afflicted faction, their campaign movements, wars, alliances, and so on and so forth. I know who to strike, how, and when. That's the late game. You fortify yourself and then choose whoever you want to raid and pillage. The Vampire Coast isn't liked by anyone, so it's easy to rack up enemies against you, but they won't attack you often due to how far away you are or how defensible your heartlands are. Only Aranessa is most exposed to brutal conflict, thanks to Tyrion's presence, and Silostra later on after she takes Lothern for herself. It's hard to get a trade agreement or a military alliance with the Vampire Coast, the easiest being Luther Harkon himself. So your campaigns are mainly solo, with nobody knowing if their ports will be your next points of interest. Thus, the Vampire Coast becomes this ever-present, unexpected force in Geoscape. This is a playstyle for opportunists, raiders, and more warscape-focused players than tactical politicians or empire managers. It is good then, that their roster reflects that so damn beautifully. The Vampire Coast is an undead faction, using infantry, artillery, and monsters to dominate. Morale and psychological elements have no effect. When defeat is certain, they start to crumble, a slow loss of health and unit models until the entire regiment collapses. It is important then to pay more attention to if your units are surrounded, rear-charged, flanked, or shot from behind. Those maneuvers annihilate leadership, particularly if executed by elite cavalry or infantry. Like Vampire Counts and Tomb Kings, Vampire Coast forces do hold their ground much longer. They can take a serious damage input before a relief or reinforcements are needed. early game chaff as well. Legendary Lords diversified the warscape much more than Geoscape, because their skill points and tech trees are reserved for specific units. Before I analyze their army compositions, I'll first focus on those they all start with, the deckhand mobs and the bloated corpses. Deckhand mobs are chaff hireable in several forms: dual sabers, halberds, and saber and pistol. Your earliest battles are swarms of this rotten seafood stumbling forth against lizardmen, high elves, savage orcs, and humans. Their role is simple: tie in other chaff and rely on numerical superiority to exterminate them, or tie in mid to late game units for a hammer and anvil, the latter led by much better regiments. The more deckhand mobs you have, the likelier your victory will be. The anti-large variant has been, to my surprise, quite effective against cavalry and monsters. It's mainly because of their armor-piercing capabilities. No other deckhand mob has that. You position them at your flanks against cavalry, at the front if the enemy's composition is made half by monsters, or right behind melee infantry if your opponent has some monsters against you. The pistol and saber deckhand mob can distract ranged infantry from your front line or replace mobs lost in battle. They can flank or rear-shoot engaged front lines, but that's not much powerful. Better units are suited for this. The bloated corpses are a novelty in Total War Warhammer 2. They're singular models of low HP, but when landing on an enemy unit, it can take down 75 to 80% of its models. I'm mixed on bloated corpses. They're excellent against early game infantry, but I didn't use them at all in mid to late game. You're supposed to hide them in your front line, then let them dart out first before melee is started. If you face them, on the other hand, focus fire with your ranged units and they should be taken down quickly. Now that these pitiful excuses of combat are done away with, let's dive further into Vampire Coast. For context, I'm going to use the same structure I used for Geoscape. Aranessa is curious, for two reasons: her Sartosan Company militias and herself. As a legendary lord, she has little to no armor, but hits hard, and is difficult to target by agents and lords, although focus fire can end her swiftly. She has 430 base armor-piercing weapon strength, and is also anti-large. She can kill enemy commanders at a reasonable pace, but she excels against monsters. Her skill tree boosts her defense, melee attack, and adds regeneration, so she can last the longest on the battlefield from her army. Her mount is a rotting Promethean, and while it removes her anti-large bonus, she's still a melee expert. She thrives in the thickest, bloodiest front lines. Aranessa always endures and needs little support even against 2 or more enemy characters. The Sartosan Company will be your early to mid-game army composition's heart. I love them. Aranessa's skill tree also buffs them up. They're a live selection of pirates who work a bit like the Empire's Free Company militias, but perform much better. High leadership, great anti-infantry weapon strength, and good charge. They can also vanguard, which none of the Vampire Coast's early game infantries can do. Sartosans serve 3 purposes. They can maintain a powerful frontline, flank or rear charge melee enemies, or become the focal point in sieges. In my siege of Alasayali, an Ivres regional capital, I hid my Sartosans in a small, wooded clumps in front of the walls, while the High Elves amassed for my distractions. When their spears and bows engaged, I let my mateys charge at the walls, climb up, and cause some mayhem inside. So, what about the rest of Aranessa's composition? She also favors artillery and Manan's oceanic creatures. For your 6 Sartosan Company militias, you want 2 to 3 gunnery mobs or deck gunners. Vampire Coast has gunpowder range that is terrifying, almost more than the Dwarves or Empire. They're equals to other gunpowder units, can have greater range than bow or crossbow units, and their focus fire can kill dragons, colossi, or other assorted titans in 2-3 salvos. Next, 2 units of artillery, mortars or the carronade, a smaller version of this game's cannons. Mortars don't have armor-piercing capabilities, but destroy formations and non-armored targets. Carronade smashes through infantry as well, but monsters are much more vulnerable. To augment your frontline, you need the rotting Prometheans, smaller cousins of the Leviathans. These purple crabs are defenders, mid to high tier units that tie enemy infantry or cavalry for your accompanied infantry to defeat them. The amazing armor and melee defense reduces any damage from anti-infantry units, although anti-large, armor-piercing or not, can make short work of them, if they fight alone. For the 6 Sartosans have 4 Prometheans. The Gunnery Wight and Fleet Captain are excellent additions. The former is a ranged zombie which increases the range, armor-piercing damage, and reload skill of artillery and ranged infantry. He can also replenish ammunition 5 times, and of any unit. When dismounted, the Gunnery Wight doesn't kill many foes, even with his grenade, but mounted on a Promethean, he's basically a high-grade sniper on a perch. On foot, enemy agents or commanders become perfect targets for him. I've already mentioned fleet captains in my Geoscape section, but in battle, they're wizards who can wield the laws of vampires, to death, and deeps. They're not great at melee, even when on a Promethean, but their magic is essential to keep undead units alive and destroy strong front lines with winds, like the Wind of Death. So, in the end, Aranessa on a Promethean, 6 Sartosan Free Company militias, 4 Rotten Prometheans, 2 to 3 gunnery mobs or deck gunners, 2 to 3 artillery pieces, either the mortars, the carronade or the queen bears, and a gunnery wight along with a fleet captain, both mounted on a Promethean. For a formation, put the Rotten Prometheans forth first, with Aranessa between them. Right behind them should be the Sartosan pirates and the fleet captain, with either the Law of the Deeps or Death. Depending on the terrain, if you're on higher ground, put the ranged infantry behind the Sartosans or in front of the Prometheans, and once their volleys have been fired, withdraw to the rear, then flank enemy infantry. Your artillery should be safely concealed behind the front line with your gunnery wight. For her tech tree, focus on ranged infantry and monster upgrades. More ammunition, armor-piercing damage, farther range for the former, fast replenishment, recruitment and more brutal charge for the latter. That way, your earliest research will toughen up the pincered bulk Aranessa uses in war. Silostra Deifan is the ethereal queen, literally. With her 80% physical resistance, enemies will have to sport magical equipment or melee attack to tear her apart. She's a wizard, so she should avoid close combat, but her magic, the new Law of the Deeps, is her greatest advantage. The Law of the Deeps is a brand new wind of magic for Total War Warhammer 2. It can increase range of infantry and artillery, but also summon Rotten Prometheans, reduce melee attack, or unleash Vankeist's Revenge, a wind that conjures up a fucking ship whose broadside cannon volley shatters formations. Silostra is the best Law of the Deeps caster, whose skill points reduce usage cost for each spell and also their cooldown periods. She can also match huge magic reserves, so it's going to be rare for her to deplete her sorcerer's prowess in battle. She doesn't need a mount early game, because you keep her in the middle of your army, or right at the back, ready to cast another destructive vortex or wind. Her faction, the Drowned, doesn't have to use any artillery, even if she starts with a carronade. She concentrates on 3 units: Sirens, Rotting Prometheans, and Mongols. Her skill points strengthen their physical resistance. Sirens are a mid-game infantry that genuinely surprised me. Ethereal and armor-piercing, their attacks also reduce melee attack of engaged regiments. If you exclude magic, few units can do them any harm. In my Siege of Lothern, 6 Sirens tied White Lions of Trace and Lothern Sea Guard to the Warwalks, while the rest of my army pounded the garrison beneath them. I did hear from Creative Assembly developers that Sirens are meant to flank or rear charge front lines too, but that's not necessary in my opinion. There are other units for that situation. The Mongols are, well, terrifying cannibal wendigos of Warhammer. Their vanguard deployment, anti-infantry, armor-piercing monsters that are your hammer's anvil. Not much armor and can suffer under focused fire or when isolated from additional units, but if used well, they can end a battle the quickest. Of course, avoid anti-large monsters, cavalry or infantry, because they don't last long against them. Other than that, a rear charge done by these boys will devastate targeted front lines. Silostra needs her faction's special hero, a ghostly Bretonnian knight who is anti-large, ethereal, but also replenishes her units quicker, and a Mongol haunter, an agent assassin both in Geo and Warscape. Wizards die under its hands in seconds, and even anti-large, mounted or dismounted, characters may not triumph over it in a duel. A Mongol haunter is also perfect for Silostra's protection if she's egged on by an enemy general or by infantry. Silostra also has an ability which distinguishes her from everyone else in the Vampire Coast. She can summon ethereal Bretonnian cavalry, either anti-large or anti-infantry. This has so much advantage to your tactical scheme, you have no idea. You can either shatter the front line in one fell swoop, or target monsters or cavalry to gain the upper hand. This is the first spell you should focus on with her, to be honest. In the end, the best composition for her is 6 Sirens, 4 Rotting Prometheans, 4 Mongols, and a Mongol haunter coupled with the Ethereal Knight. For a formation, use the Prometheans like you would with Aranessa. Place the Sirens behind them. Flank your army with the Mongols 2 for 2. Silostra at the back, haunter next to her or with the Sirens, and the same for the Ethereal Knight. Her research is exclusively focused on monsters and ethereal infantry. Faster replenishment and recruitment, stronger physical resistance, more ferocious charges, and speedier marches. In early game, Silostra needs this technology to take out Lothar. In late game, both Luther Harkon and Count Noctilis use the Depth Guard. Incredible anti-infantry and anti-large vampire sea pirates, with one of the best armor sets in the game. They have Hunger, which regenerates their health in combat, and are quite speedy. While the anti-infantry version has no armor piercing, it can hold off against most late-game elites. Our dear Mad Arch-Commodore Luther is a general and hero killer, whose best targets are wizards, because he saps their winds of magic and casting abilities. He's just about armored and deals massive damage output, both melee and ranged. He's also durable due to hunger and his high melee defense stats. His equipment and skill points can rack up his weapon strength almost to 700, and while not armor piercing, it's still a huge number to contest with. His mount is a Deathshriek Terrorgeist. Flying, Luther can pick out characters, tie them in melee, and slaughter them before help can arrive. He is best at waiting for the perfect opportunity. If you solve his personal quest, you can unlock his Law of the Deeps, which turns him even deadlier. His Vangeist's Revenge is a spell you'll often use across your playthrough. Harkon's Bulk are the Depth Guard, both variations. Good artillery is key for him. And here we come to the Queen Bess and Necrofex Colossi units. Queen Bess is currently the largest artillery piece in the game. It has an upward arc, deals incredible damage, and shatters formations. Her blasts also slow down enemy advancements. She's a regiment of renown unlockable through an expensive right. If protected from rear attacks, she will plow through infantry and cavalry both. Necrofex Colossi are, hands down, the best Vampire Coast unit. An amalgamation of corpses and rotten sunken ship carcasses, they can fight in melee like giants, but also have a 4-barreled cannon for a left arm. They're an artillery piece whose armament is high ground, which means they rarely ever miss. They obliterate box formations of cavalry and infantry, and their range is also impressive, though not as eagle-eyed as the dwarven or imperial artillery. In melee, if they don't fight against anti-large, they can hold off long enough for reinforcements. Luther's skill points also enhance the Deathshriek Terrorgeists, undead dragons present since the first Total War Warhammer. Their breath is weak, but they do regenerate and are the perfect avian support for front lines. Or they can single out faraway artillery pieces if necessary. Still, don't just plunge them headlong into enemy bulks, or they'll be gone quicker than you'd like. For ranged infantry, gunnery mobs and deck gunners excel under Harkon. Use them like you would with Aranessa. For heroes, Luther could have an extra fleet captain for more magic, and of course, a gunnery wight to sharpen the Necrofex Colossi and Queen Bess's capabilities. They don't have to be mounted, since Luther doesn't sport crabs. So, for the Arch Commodore, have 6 units of anti-infantry depth guard, 4 units of anti-large depth guard, 2 gunnery mobs or deck gunners, 3 Death Shriek Terrorgeists, one of them Luther himself, 2 Necrofex Colossi, and the fleet captain along with the gunnery wight. For a formation, have the front line made from your anti-infantry depth guard. If you're facing lots of monsters, put the anti-large counterparts 4th instead, or right behind if there aren't that many. In other situations, place the halberds at your flanks for extra security. Luther and the Terrorgeists should fly above the depth guard axis. Necrofex Colossi and Queen Bess together should be behind the depth guard. The fleet captain can accompany the depth guard axis or stay away with the gunnery wight behind the melee. Deck gunners and gunnery mobs should be used identically to Aranesses. Luther has the most spread out technological pursuits. In the melee infantry section, seek out higher melee defense for the depth guard, reduced upkeep for them, richer ports, and faster replenishment. The range infantry and monster sections are identical to Aranesses. Welcome to Noctilus's Monster Mash. Niklaus von Karstein should be proud of his name. While his anti-large armor-piercing skills aren't the game's height, his health pool and resistances make him the most durable legendary lord. He's also a magician, his spell tree a combination of shadow, death and deeps. He's one of the best invocation of Nehek and Wind of Death casters. He can heal units at ludicrous efficiency and annihilate any front line, armored or no. You almost never have to worry about him whenever he's in combat. To see his health go beneath 20% is an extraordinary circumstance. His skill points focus the most on monsters, which are his army composition's core. He becomes a part of it through his mount, a damn Necrofex Colossus. Best mount. No questions asked. He uses all the best late game beasts, including the Rotten Leviathan, the final one I haven't talked about. It's a gigantic reddish crab, a singular unit with a purpose near identical to the Rotten Prometheans, except they have a much larger weapon strength. 420 and armor piercing as their base. Together with Depth Guard or the Sartosan Company militia, they tie in the front line and shred opposition. Noctilus doesn't need heroes, to be honest. He's a skilled enough combatant and wizard to not need one. If you'd like a companion still, I chose a Mongol Haunter to have something against a potential wizard or a weak commander. Noctilus needs 6 anti-infantry depth guard, 4 anti-large depth guard, 2 Death Shriek Terrorgeists, 3 Rotten Leviathans, 4 Necrofex Colossi, one of them Noctilus's mount, and the Mongol Haunter. Put the Rotten Leviathans first into the front line, then the anti-infantry depth guard or the anti-large ones if there are more monsters ahead or at your flanks. The Terrorgeists will fly above them, and Noctilus, with his Colossi, will back up the rear. The Mongol Haunter can join the Leviathans or the depth guard. His tech tree mimics Luther Harken's, except the richer ports. And there you have it. Yes, there are some units I haven't delved into for several reasons. They're either mid-game or units I didn't use at all, or once, maybe twice. One of them are the animated Hulks, first early game monstrous unit that dishes out good damage, but is too weak even with infantry support, and doesn't match the Prometheans at all. I'd use them only when you have no other options. The deck droppers are gunnery mobsters that are suspended in the air by gigantic bats. They're best for picking out artillery pieces, but other than that, they're a gimmick. A shame, because they looked useful in streams. A Gunpowder, airborne unit with much greater accuracy than land-based versions. Then there are the Rotten Promethean gunnery mobs, which are just Prometheans with mobsters on their backs. Same purpose, but just extra ranged damage. So, what are the Vampire Coast's overall weaknesses? For starters, no cavalry. You've none. High Elves, Bretonnia or Empire can topple you over if they have enough horses and you don't have enough anti-large. Secondly, they're undead, so each unit's health pool is smaller and unit models are weaker than live opponents. You must put greater care into leadership and sustainability like the invocation of Nehek spells. Individual infantries and monsters don't do well when isolated. It's a synergy-heavy faction that relies on mutual support. Infantry needs monsters, and vice versa. Vampire Coast has fewer artillery pieces, even though each has great statistics, especially if accompanied by a gunnery wight. They also rely more on synergy, unlike the Dwarves or Empire. Ranged infantry is also limited only to gunpowder and few units at your disposal. In late game, you'll be deciding between two only: the gunnery mob and the deck gunners. Almost nobody thought the next campaign pack would rival the quality of the Tomb Kings, but we got proven wrong. The Vampire Coast is amazing. A successful half-horde, half-settler experimentation with an explosive, terrifying roster. The legendary lords are excellent character snipers, unstoppable casters, and indestructible combatants. Your economy relies on daring raids, a network of pirate coves, and a safe, obscure heartland where you can retreat when needed. Your roster blasts cannons, cuts humanoids and beasts in two, hurls vampire sea pirates against puny mortals while muskets shriek from nearby. The Vampire Coast is destruction and joy morphed into one. Your dream isn't a humongous empire, but a humiliation of every faction on the horizon by defeating their legendary lords and sacking racial capitals across the Warhammer world. A nightmare of the sea, pistol and saber in hand. For my first ever tactical analysis, what better introductory faction is there?
I know you.